Hello, friends. On this glorious day in drink history, we speak with Peter Vestinos. As president of the Chicago chapter of the United States Bartenders Guild, Mr. Vestinos certainly has his finger on the pulse of Chicago cocktail culture. Peter's background includes opening the iconic Michelin-starred Sepia in Chicago nearly 10 years ago, and since then he has launched an educational consulting agency called Bar Medic, continued his work behind the stick at such inspired bars as the Betty and Sparrow, and given back to his local cocktail community through his aforementioned work with the USBG. He's an inspired guy with education on his mind. Let's do this. This episode of the Educational Drinking Show is sponsored by the Anchor Distilling Company Tasting Room. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in 23 years, Anchor Distilling Company has opened its doors to the public. And you can go to the iconic distillery on Potrero Hill in San Francisco for an intimate, in-depth tasting of Anchor spirits on the roof of the building. It's as amazing as it sounds. And it's a very popular experience, so advance reservations are required. Reserve your spot today at www.anchordistilling.com. Good stuff. And now it is my great pleasure to share with you my interview with Peter Vestinos.
Well, I've been in the Chicago scene for about 15 years, minus the 3 years I was in San Francisco. But currently, I run a bar called Sparrow, which is in the Gold Coast of Chicago. Do that kind of like a old Chicago lobby bar with a Havana feel to it, Miami Havana 1930s feel to it. And I'm also president of the Bartenders Guild here in Chicago.
Tell me about that, being president of the Bartenders Guild. How did that come to be?
It was a typical Chicago election where I was, I think, the only name or maybe one of two names in the ballot, but it was the Guild we're one of the older chapters. We're about 10 years old, and part of the challenge is always keeping the interest of older members and recruiting new members, and it's something any chapter goes through. So I think when I got the Guild, we were one of those periods where interest was starting to go away. There was a lot more. Also, we're in a city where everyone's kind of a brand ambassador, so it's not like it used to be. There's a lot of information out there these days, and there's a lot of information not just through the brand ambassadors, but through what you do and what other media do. And the information flies fast right now. So sometimes the question is, why do I still need the Guild? And that's kind of where a lot of older chapters, even some new chapters, are at. Mm-hmm. And that was our challenge. Where does the Guild fit into the bartenders world right now? And also, is it just bartenders? Because, as you graduate from bartenders, you can't always do it forever. Well, some do. My dad bartended into his 70s.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it for a while. And I hope I can do it for a while as well. But, some have become brand ambassadors. Some work brand managers. Some become corporate mixologists. Those are still things bartenders do. And how do they fit into the Guild? So we got in an interesting crossroads.
And what inspired you to want to put in the time and step up and offer some leadership for the USBG here?
Honestly, a lot of it was my time in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, when I was an active member before I left, it was fine. We had meetings. We listened to brands. We came out, and maybe a dozen people. We'd have lunch, and it was good.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of all we knew. And then when I went to San Francisco, and I saw and granted, they still have one of the best chapters in the country, but when I saw the download of information, how active those members were in the meetings, I said to myself, good God, I'd never want to be a presenter here, because they were grilling them pretty hard. And it was, I always remember my first chapter meeting. I showed up 15 minutes late, which in Chicago would have been 45 minutes early. And I opened the door, and there were about 30 heads all down in the notepads writing. And everyone looks up at me, and they stop the meeting to reset for me that's coming in 15 minutes late. And I said, oh, okay, this is the new standard. So a lot of my time in San Francisco kind of inspired me to come back and put in the volunteer time here.
And when did you become president of the USBG here?
About 2 years ago now.
And what were your expectations going in, and what has the experience unfolded in terms of being for you?
The expectation was, the thing you need to understand is really you can make of it what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I like to try and tell the officers and the other members is we do have national mandates we need to follow as far as some national partners and some national programming, some national schedules. But aside from that, we can do what we want. And early on, we had sort of a meet and greet when we became officers. And I expected, honestly, a little bit more of a casual evening. But I had friends, put their fingers in my chest and say, I've been paying $100 a year, and I want my money's worth now. It's time to fess up. So that's when I really felt the pressure to deliver, meetings on schedule every month. And also the big complaint is, how do we work with smaller brands? Everyone wants to work with smaller brands, and everyone thinks that, the guild is just for big brands, and you have to figure that out. And granted, there's nothing I've never said there's anything wrong with being a big brand. It's no one's fault that they've succeeded and become a big brand. You can't fault anyone for succeeding. But how do we help bring in the smaller brands? And part of that was using some of our own funds and doing some other creative ways to make events accessible to them.
And what have you gotten out of it in terms of your time invested?
Lots of free lunches.
Lots of free lunches?
No,
has it been a rewarding experience?
It has been. I do chide myself, or I do kid that I'm sometimes I have my nose really focused on the education of this of other bartenders a little, even outside before I started with the guild. That's always kind of been my thing, and I get a lot of satisfaction bringing education to bartenders that I otherwise wouldn't seek it out. And that's kind of also been the disappointing thing. I'm surprised at how many people are still afraid to come to a meeting. They'll say, I want to join, but I just don't know what to do. And you're like, well, just sign up and we'll send you a meeting notice, and you just show up, and that's all you have to do. And people are really afraid. It's any sort of community activity, I guess, or volunteer activity. People want to do it, just don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. So that's been a little bit of the still frustrating part of it. But, for me, it's definitely been a good sense of building that community, but also working with these brands to let them know how to engage with the guild, let them know what we have available, let them know what we do, let them know what the new guild looks like in this kind of modern era, and helping bridge that. I think whoever takes over after me, I hope we've left them in a good position of, I see this, our 2-year term is kind of that bridge between the older style guild and the newer millennial style guild.
And in your opinion, what's the value for bartenders? What are they getting out of it? Is it more the community, the education, all the above, something else?
Yeah, it is all the above. It's definitely a sense of community, being part of the community, and showing up to the meetings. We have 250 members, and I don't expect everyone to show up to every meeting. I couldn't deal with it if everybody showed up to every meeting. But I like to know that they're informed about what's going on, and still that sense of you're part of the community. Even if you can't show up for an entire year, I know bartenders that are still very proud of being USBG members. Other things they can get from it is obviously connections. We do try and promote some job opportunities early before other people get the word out on that. So we try and realize that this is a livelihood for people, and we try and provide for that in terms of knowing about jobs or getting you prepared for jobs. And it's good. We do have suppliers now that have a lot of respect for guild members and are seeking guild members for jobs.
What advice do you have for folks out there that are thinking about potentially, getting involved with leadership in the USBG?
Yeah, again, it is what you make of it. Get in there, but follow through. I mean, when we have meetings, it's so many things are thrown against the wall, and then you'll turn and look and say, all right, you're going to do it? And no, I'm not going to do it. So if you're going to get involved, make sure you have the ability and capability and the time to follow through on your promises. That's the toughest part. I have a policy of you can't drop anything at my feet, meaning if you come to me with a great idea, I want to help you see it through. Mm-hmm. But you can't. We've got enough going on where you can't just say, I want to do this event, here you go. Yeah. So be involved, but if you have an action plan to follow it through, you can execute it. I'm sure any guild would be happy to follow through that action plan as long as it fits in the goals of the guild.
And where did your bartending journey begin?
Oh, that's interesting. I moved to Chicago with the intention of being here for 1 year. I was going to go to, I figured out where if I was going to go to New York or LA for film school because I wanted to be a cinematographer. And I was literally living in a walk-in closet. I was paying $300 a month. I was making like $200 a week as a production manager. I was making nothing in 2000. And I needed to make money. So I talked my way into a bartending job at this little French bistro, and they said, you know, you're gonna do it on Saturdays. And I said, well, that's kind of weird. Isn't that the coveted position? You're giving it to the new guy. And they gave it to me, and it was old school. I mean, it was a 60th Street bistro with a cabaret downstairs, no POS system. I had an 8-seat bar. Servers would run by the bar and scream orders at me, even while I'm already taking orders from guests. Like you learn fast how to like stack the stuff up in your brain. And it was fun. For some reason, I was good at it. I was quick at it. I enjoyed talking to the guests. It took my mind off my regular job. And, you know, I did the math. And 1 weekend's worth of work, I was making what I was making in a month at my regular desk job. But, you know, you didn't want to give up that dream. So I stuck with that for about 4 years. And super interesting wine program from southwest France, Languedoc, Provence, and varietals I had never heard of. You know, I was just used to dealing with Chardonnay, Cabernet, and my mom's White Zinfandel, and that's all I knew about wine. So I got into it. I started studying it, and then after a while, it was time to decide if I was going to do this full time. And I took a little time off. I did go down to New Orleans for a couple months, just clear my head, and I came back. I said I want to bartend full time, so I found a job at a wine bar. Great wine bar. We had 115 wines by the glass that changed out every 4 months. My roommate at the time was studying to be a somm. We had a lot of great people come over to my house and do their tastings every Thursday. So I was living the wine world. It was fantastic. And we were paying nothing for rent, and all our money was going to wine. It was a very decadent time in my life. But I remember clearly one night I was getting into bed, and I pulled out, I believe it was a Food and Wine magazine. And there was an article on the Pegu Club, which I just opened up a few weeks earlier. And it said, you know, classic cocktails, fresh juices, no soda guns, no vodka. And my first thought is, this bar's going to be closed in a week. What the hell? What are they thinking? So we happened to be going to New York a few weeks later, and we got in early. I said, I'm going to check out this bar that's going to be a failure. So we went there, and this is 2005, I believe they opened up. And I ordered the first thing on the menu, the whiskey smash, and the bartender jiggers out the whiskey. And I'd never seen anyone but an airport bartender use a jigger before, and pulls off the mint leaves and drops the citrus in there and takes his hunk of ice and just cracks it with his muddler and drops it in the glass and shakes it harder than I've seen anyone shake a drink. And it made a beautiful sound in the tin. He poured it out, garnished it, slid it across the bar, and I just stared at the thing for a good minute. And I knew from then on this was a cocktail, and I could never go back to anything I thought what a cocktail had been before. And I came back and I started excitedly telling people about my experience, and they're doing drinks with egg whites and all these fresh ingredients and fresh juices that they do every day. And I tried to tout that for a couple of years, and I couldn't do it at the wine bar. I had no outlet for it. And then luckily a place called Sepia was opening. It's still there, so one of my favorite restaurants in the city, Michelin-starred restaurant, and they had an idea they wanted to do classic cocktails. They had kind of an outline of the cocktails they wanted to do, but they didn't really have someone to do it. So they hired me as a bartender, but as we got closer and closer to opening day, I was noticing nobody was really doing anything about the bar. So I kind of put my hand up and said, you know, do you want me to start doing the cocktails and prepping for it? And I did, and they let me do it, and, you know, it's kind of, the rest is history for me. We had a lot of success, and granted, I remind people we were the only ones doing it at the time. It was a little bit before Violet Hour and Drawing Room opened up, and luckily those places, when they opened up, they did kind of give credence to what we were doing, because people were still afraid. I mean, I literally used to have menus thrown at me because I didn't have a martini list. No one knew what ginger beer was at the time. Moscow Mule flipped everyone's lid back then. And, you know, it's only 9 years ago now, but it changed things, I think, and changed things for me, and I think changed things for Chicago for sure. And then from there, I was recruited by Worth's Beverage to be their cocktail guy, and then had a stint in California working for a spirits company, and then, you know, I've been since consulting.
Awesome. And then what were you doing out in San Francisco?
Sorry to bore you with that long story.
No, I love it. I mean, well, before we get there, you kind of picked a good city to get into the whole cocktail scene with. I mean, so much influence has originated here in terms of the cocktail movement.
Yeah, we're a drinking town, and Chicago does have a long drinking history. And we are an international city for sure. And being where we were with Sepia in the West Loop, close to the Loop with a lot of hotels, a lot of travelers coming through, it was definitely the right place at the right time for sure.
What is your perception of Chicago as a drinking city today?
It's still a great town. It's still a great drinking city. What's interesting right now is you're seeing the cocktail trying to find its new life in neighborhood bars and different nooks and crannies of the city. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to have a cocktail program. Some people shouldn't. Or, the thing I try and tell people is like, let's not focus on your cocktail program. Let's focus on your techniques. You don't necessarily need to be a cocktail bar, but if someone's walking in and ordering a Manhattan, a martini, a margarita, let's make sure your bartender's executing those. Mm-hmm. All right. I don't want you to, try and source up all this new material to come up with a cocktail menu that's going to be too hard for you to execute. But I just want the technique to be better. So it's interesting. Right now we're growing fast. Cocktails are everywhere right now in Chicago. The beer scene is exploding as well. The wine scene is down, which I'm kind of disappointed on. I'd love to see the wine come back a little bit in this town. But I think where we're failing a little bit in Chicago is things are growing so fast. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I see a lot of people using really poor techniques or just copying other people's poor techniques. It's interesting. You see bartenders that have only bartended, where I came from a different career and my peers came from different careers and bartended in high volume non-cocktail spots. You see people who have just bartended in cocktail spots now. So they don't always have that full appreciation of where they are now and where they've come from. Or where we came from.
One of the things I didn't really realize is how much of an international element there is here in Chicago and how that can support some more obscure spirits, that they have a place here, they have a life here that you don't see as much maybe on the coast.
Are you talking about Malort?
among many, or like kind of the funkier white spirits, kind of more the European stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of things that have a relevance here that maybe they don't in other cities.
Yeah, for sure. We have a great cultural background. I currently work with a portfolio of Greek spirits, which is just taking off in the U.S. It's interesting to convey that history of these 4 individual spirits that go back literally thousands of years each. But they are, because we do have great Greek history in Chicago, they are being perceived well as well.
It's really cool. So San Francisco, what were you doing out there?
I moved out there initially working with Death Store Spirits. And then after that, I opened up I was just bartending, after that job, after we parted ways, I just wanted to bartend. I wanted to immerse myself into that scene. So I worked at Prospect for a little bit. I helped a friend of mine reconcept his bar in like on the neighborhood. Anyway, it was Long Bar, helped open up Easy Bar in the East Bay and then Honor Bar in the East Bay as well. With Alex Smith, who is now, of course, with Martin Kate over at Whitechapel. So it was just getting behind bars. And it was also just taking as many day trips as I could up into the vineyards, out to the distilleries. So much to offer out there, but just getting to know the community.
And contrasting Chicago and San Francisco, what are the differences from a bartender's perspective, other than punctuality? Or are there? Is that something that's not as big of a deal as one might think?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, in Chicago, I joke about it a little bit sometimes too, but our activities, our day off, in the West Coast, you live there, your day off might entail going to the beach or going up in the vineyards or going for a hike or going skiing. Here, sometimes our day off is just doing what we do on our days on, it's just drinking for bartenders. And it's just, that's your cultural experience. You go to other people's bars, which is a great way to learn. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I can see the burn a lot more in bartenders out here. I think we need to achieve a little bit more of a work-life balance. And that's something we've also introduced into the guild here. We do have a health and wellness initiative. We've done some outings there. We've got some nutrition programs coming up as well. So we're trying to introduce a little bit more of a better work-life balance out here. I do think the bartenders in California, it's just the nature of being out there too. They have the benefit of that lifestyle, that coastal lifestyle, where they can get out there a little bit more.
That's something I wish you'd hear a little bit more about, or even just The physical toll it takes on your body, standing behind a bar for 8 hours a day. It's not nothing. It's a big deal.
Interesting. When I first moved out there, when we opened up Sepia, we had the cold draft system, as a lot of people did when they first opened, and I was really excited to use it and loved the cold draft ice. And when I moved out to California, and I started talking to some bartenders, everyone has like an ace or some compression around their wrist or elbow or shoulder. Some bartenders can't bartend more than 2 days in a row. And I started asking questions, and they did have that cold draft out there, and I hope I don't get sued by cold draft, but they were shaking with those bigger ice cubes for a lot longer than we were in Chicago, and I noticed the physical toll on that. So that's something I'd bring into my consulting life now, and discuss with my clients when they want big, heavy ice cubes. I say, I recommend it or don't recommend it for several reasons, but one of them is the physical tolls on bartenders.
Now, how did you transition from being a traditional straight-up bartender to this consulting work that you're doing now?
Fell into it, essentially. I was lucky where I was opening those series of bars in San Francisco. I had just been asked to come back and open up Michael Jordan Steakhouse here in Chicago through some connections. I warn people that just start up and say, I'm going to be a consultant. It's not that easy. You need to do that slow burn. You need to get some clients under your belt, some experience under your belt. And that's what happened to me. It was just a series of projects were coming my way. And luckily, and that was 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. And I'd say after that, this is the first year that I've been able to have my income completely through consulting after 5 years.
Wow.
So it's always been a supplement of some other position to get it going.
And what does success look for you these days? What are you really aspiring to do? To build the consulting?
Yeah, it's. I want to go more towards the education route without revealing too much. But I want to go down the book route. I just came from a meeting on a book. I want to go down more that education route. That's really where I have my passion. The other reason I fell into this is I'm a history, political, and geography buff. I love my trivia, and wine and brought all that together for me, and then spirits brought all that together for me. And that's part of the education, and I do a lot of consumer events, and I love digging into the how and why spirit developed. Why did bourbon develop after rye? And we get into whole whiskey rebellion and the movement west, and people don't really realize that's why we're drinking bourbon now instead of rye. So I really geek out on the education part of it. So I want to build out my training modules a little bit more in terms of books and classes, and hopefully eventually a school.
That's cool. So you're able to kind of circle back around to that cinematographer, artist, communicator, and hopefully blend the two.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What are you drinking these days? Any categories got your attention?
Well, rum focus with Sparrow, and I'm going through my rums. So that's definitely on my palate.
I had a hell of a Hemingway daiquiri last night.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We have fun over there. It's a fun bar. And honestly, a lot of people don't realize we're a rum focused bar, and that's not always the intention. We don't want rum in your rum just so present that you don't feel like you can have anything else. We're definitely wine and beer focused as well. But to answer your question, I'm drinking a lot of rum these days. As the weather starts to turn, I go back to my scotches. But wine, honestly, I still my passion's for wine for sure. And as I try and drink a little bit, like when I say I'm not drinking, that means wine's still on the table. So as I try and take a little bit of a break, wine's still on the table.
Yeah. What about wine-based spirits, more like the vermouths and stuff like that? Fascination there?
For sure, with the Mari.
Yeah.
And vermouth. A couple years ago, we opened up a place called Belly Q, which was a Korean inspired restaurant for the most part, and with those pretty full flavors on the palate with some heat. I wanted something that was a little bit lower alcohol, and so that was playing around with some sake, sojus, vermouths there. That was a fun menu to do for sure.
Nice.
Sorry, I was just going to, that sake is something that's really got me geeked out. I haven't been back to it for about a year, but I did go get my certification there, and everyone's so sherry focused right now and loves sherry, and I tell you, if you love sherry in a cocktail, you're going to get so much more out of sake too. The palate even goes wider for sake.
And sake is such a rabbit hole. I mean, sake is just not sake. There's just so many variations. And
yeah, when you start plotting it out and you develop this whole graph of sake, it's massive. And that's the challenge of the sake producers now, getting the education out there. And I think they do have to start thinking about doing some changes in the labeling. Very traditional, and they have a right to be. But to some degree, I think we need to integrate some changes to get the American mindset behind it a little more.
And how are you using Greek spirits? I'm curious about that.
The trick with that is not just focusing that they're Greek. It's a flavor that you can contribute into the cocktail, just like any other modifier, any other liqueur. So as much as I promote that they're Greek spirits, sometimes you just have to say, well, they're not Greek spirits. So this one's a honey-based, this one's a grappa-based liqueur with some honey added to it. This one's a cinnamon and clove bud liqueur, and this one is a mastica, which is really cool. So you got to start thinking about it in terms of flavor. I'm introducing a cinnamon-flavored spirit. I'm introducing this kind of resin-flavored spirit into the cocktail, just as a modifier.
And then you mentioned you're headed to Barbados tomorrow, going to do some rum drinking. I'm curious, in terms of education, there's maybe not a more powerful way to learn than to visit a region. Do any regions stand out to you that you visited that you're like, I didn't get this spirit until I went to the source, until I went to the region?
Yeah, a few of them. I mean, as bartenders, we're all agave geeked out right now, and I had two really fantastic experiences with tequila. I'd like to go back down to Oaxaca and experience mezcal. I had a brief trip. I didn't get as much out of it as I should have, but I'd like to go back there. But two key trips for tequila were with Carlos Camarena and my good friend Tomas Estes with Tequila Ocho, walking through the Alteña distillery and just spending so much time in the field. And Carlos is really more of a farmer than he is anything. And just watching him work with his humidors and look at, and just his personal interaction with them is amazing. Just the trust he puts in these field workers for him that deliver his final product. But just to watch that inspection process of the agave plants and just how he talks about the agave plants, and then Tomas to come through and do Tomas's super esoteric take on the growth of the agave plant was amazing for me. And then going on the Fortaleza trip last year to Tequila Town and getting into close to the volcano and where you see all this obsidian stone in the soil and really get more of that sense of terroir. Those two trips were definitely very special for me in terms of tequila. And then 2 years ago, I got to go to Chile to experience pisco production in the Alki Valley. And that's, it's said that's where one of the Earth's magnetic points are. And you see a lot of Reiki and yoga studios there. And there's a lot of spirituality, and people say the energy is right there. The Earth's energy is right there. And you can kind of feel it when you're standing on those plateaus and looking at the fields. You can kind of feel it.
You got to go to Peru.
I'd love to go to Peru.
Got to go to Peru. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you bring up mezcal and tequila. Terroir has become such a topic of conversation on this show. And especially for people with a wine background, it's so cool to see terroir become such a big part of the spirits conversation. For sure. The other thing is, I always tell people, or tell a lot of my guests, the weird thing is we sometimes drink out of context in the U.S. And that's an interesting thing. You see these beautiful menus that bartenders are developing, but it's almost, you see the different regions. They're bringing these different cultures into one space in the menu. And we see it at Sparrow too, where our theme is icy drinks. And it's kind of tough sometimes to do icy drinks in a very cold city. Yeah. And you can either turn people off with that, or you can entice them as an escape. But once you go to a place and you're drinking that cocktail or that spirit in that place, I had a great experience of being in Greece. It sounds like I lived the charmed life. I was in Greece last year on George Skoros' boat, drinking ouzo in the sun in this little cove with a meze. And I'd never been a big ouzo drinker, but when you're drinking it right there in the hot sun with the meze and the Mediterranean around you, you get it. But if I dropped ouzo in front of most people here, they probably wouldn't know what to do with it. Or pastis. I love pastis. In the heat. I think pastis, those flavors, again, I know it's along those anise flavor with ouzo. I think we're still maybe 3 to 5 years off in the U.S. for that, but I think it's going to be a flavor we're going to enjoy. But pastis, consuming that in the hot sun is magical. Yeah. Do you see any categories just on the cusp of emerging in terms of the drinks that you're making and what's happening at Sparrow?
I've been saying for a little while, brandy for me is going to be the next big category we should look out for. And people are drinking American spirits. We're really big into bourbon. People like aged spirits. And bourbon's wonderful. Bourbon's a wonderful spirit, but after a while you see different variations of the same note to some degree. With brandy, you can have many different sources for that spirit, many different fruit, and that comes through in the final distillate. And also in a country where we're very age focused with how long something will age, fruit distillates take on that age a lot better than a corn distillate. You can age a fruit distillate a very long time. 30.
Calvados.
Calvados, for example, yeah.
Yeah.
But Asacalas, for example, out of California, is doing some beautiful long-aged product.
And brandy's kind of a big deal, and particularly in the northern states, like the Minnesotas and the Wisconsins, just because of those traditions that were brought over way back when from immigrants. Like
the German distillers, German fruit distillers, yeah.
You just don't see that as much like on the West Coast.
No. But, they produce so much fruit on the West Coast. I think that story still has to be told, and I think we're getting there. And for me, that's the next big spirit is brandy.
Agreed. I hope you're right.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I really enjoyed hearing your story. I appreciate you taking some time before you jet off to warmer temperatures. And I guess it's not that cold here. I was actually surprised at how warm it is in September.
No, we're having a great fall.
There it is. Well,
thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is great. I enjoyed learning more about your scene, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you.
There we go. Cheers.